Adventurous scripture requires adventurous object lessons. Welcome back, you guys. This is the creative side of week 34, where I'm going to take a few key principles that I found in chapters 53 to 63 of ALMA and find cool ways that you could teach them. Just remember, these are just beginning ideas. You could take them in a bunch of different directions, and I'm going to help you figure out how. So essentially, I'm trying to provide equipment for you to teach these to any group, whether you're in a family setting and you're teaching from your kitchen, or if you're in your calling, or maybe you're a teenager and you're teaching other teenagers. My hope is that you can adapt these to fit your key circumstances. I would just remind you that, like every week, even though these three are kind of targeted to these 10 or 11 chapters, there are lots of other ones. For example, if you haven't had a chance to teach the Covenant Path mini golf, it's one of the most popular ones on the site. This is a great week to teach it. You see a lot about covenants this week, and teaching mini golf is a great way to have your kids understand the covenants and those promises and the blessings that come from them. Another one that would work really well this week is to focus in on Amaron and Satan's strategies. And you could do that by using that magnetic fishing game, one where you like wrap the string around a toilet paper roll and you try and catch the fish and learn more about the adversary's tactics. Both of those would be great. But let me introduce you to the three that we have specifically for this week. Okay. First off, we're going to start with this idea of obeying with exactness. The Stripling Warriors are this incredible story of obedience, and their exact obedience grants them an additional power and capacity, different blessings that flow their way because of their exactness. And there's a really cool way to teach that. So for this one, if you want to make it food related, which I feel like you always do when it comes to teaching teenagers, then you want to grab these. Either cupcakes or Twinkies, any of these would work. You could probably do something homemade, but personally, I thought it was more funny to have them be these packaged one. So you're going to grab a few of these. If that's not available to you, or you've got allergies or something in your class, you could also do this with wadded up paper towels and it would be just the same. So you need those, and then you need some clear plastic cups. Mine are the 16-ounce size. They're from Walmart, but any cup you have in your kitchen cupboard will probably work. You just want one that has kind of a narrower base. Okay, second, we're going to talk about the unity that happens among the Stripling Warriors. Oftentimes we talk about them almost like they're on this pedestal and that they just were granted God's deliverance, but I actually think they have to work for it. They must work for their unity as a brotherhood because they stay tight even when times are hard and when they're starving and when they don't have reinforcements. They don't murmur against each other. They don't murmur against Helaman, and they never defect. So there must be a unity that happens among them. So we're going to talk about the power of unity, and one of my favorite ways to put it to the test is to make your kids walk on eggs. So for this one, you just need, if you want the printable, there's a printable that goes with this one that can wrap around a carton of eggs so that you can teach the lesson a little easier. But ideally, you'd have 2 cartons of a dozen eggs or so. You could use 18 packs if you want. You could even do many different cartons of eggs and make them walk across the room. It's totally up to you on how many eggs you want to buy, but I would probably start with at least a dozen, ideally 2 dozen, and keep those on hand. Okay, third object lesson. We didn't get to talk about Moroni and Pahoran much in the Sparks, but I did want to focus it here because I think we've heard so much from our prophet lately about setting down contention and finding ways to be a peacemaker. And Moroni and Pahoran's example is just remarkable. So for this one, you're going to talk about the idea of approaching things with harshness and approaching things with a soft touch. And my favorite way to teach that is to make Oobleck. So if you haven't made this before, it looks a little bit like this. It's kind of like a magic mud of sorts that you're going to make with just cornstarch and water and teach your kids a really memorable lesson about coming in softly. So those are your supplies. Now let's get into the details. One of the best tools you now have in your tool belt to teach about the Stripling Warriors is the Book of Mormon video. It was just released a few weeks ago and it's fantastic. You guys, it's a little longer than some of their other ones, but it is so good, so well done, and your kids will love it. So first, I would encourage you, before you head into this object lesson, to let them watch that Book of Mormon video and watch for the characteristics you see in these Stripling Warriors. What do they look like? Who are they? What kind of commitments do they make? Talk through. I give you a lot of ideas in the notes of some key things you could point out about their faith or about their obedience or other things. But one thing I love is how Helaman describes them as exactly obedient. When he's writing a letter to Moroni and describing these sons, he talks about their exactness. They do exactly what they're asked to do. They do it without question. They do it without murmuring. They are steady that way. Not because they are sheep, but because they have such trust in Helaman. I think it's part of the reason they chose Helaman, a prophet, to be their leader, because they knew they could trust a prophet at all times. He doesn't have any ulterior motives. He just wants them to gain the victory. And so they trust him. And because of that, they're obedient. And I think we can tie that to our own kids in listening to our prophet in our day. when we choose to follow our prophet's words with exact obedience, blessings flow into our life. You can go into any one of his conference talks of the last 5 years and read the promises that he offers and what he asks us to do. They're powerful promises, you guys. You can see some of them in the notes, but I wanted to be able to teach my kids in a cool way so that they can remember the value of exact obedience, that it can help you do things that you could never do on your own. When you choose to be obedient, grace flows in, and grace allows you to do things you can do otherwise. And this is how you show it. So basically you're going to get, for us this year, for the first time, I decided to make this a cupcake analogy because my kids, regardless of how many times I tell them that these are like terrible for their body and I would never put this in my mouth, they still crave them and want them, especially because it's back to school season and they're everywhere. So I bought some of these and then I put them at the bottom of a cup. So you're going to take it out of the package and you're going to kind of wedge it into the bottom of a cup. You're basically going to tell them that you're going to put this into the base of the cup and it will stay dry. They'll be able to eat it at the end of the lesson, but it has to go through a serious test of faith first. So in order to keep and consume their cupcake, which I know they want, or their Twinkie, they have to follow my words with exact obedience. And it's really critical that they listen and they follow. So this is when you bring out a big bowl. You want something deep. Ideally something clear and deep. So you can either use a big like mixing bowl, or for us, I found a big plastic tub. It's even better if you can do this with colored water in it, because then your kids will be even more afraid. But you're gonna dunk your cupcake in the water and bring it out dry again, but only if they follow your tips with exact obedience. So the first step that you're going to guide them in is to wedge their Twinkie or their cupcake into the bottom. You want to make sure that if you have the cupcake here at the base, if you flip your cup upside down on your hand, that cupcake doesn't drop right back down again. It needs to be really wedged. So you kind of have to like tuck the frosting against the edges, and if the cup size you're working with doesn't work, find one with a narrower base and get it nice and wedged in there. If you're working with a paper towel, because you can't do this with food, same idea. Make sure you have enough paper towel pushed into the bottom that if you flip it upside down, it doesn't drop right down to the bottom. Once you have that in place, you're going to give them the guidance to dunk their cup. So this is where exact obedience comes in. It's really specific how you dunk. You're going to keep it absolutely vertical. If you go at an angle or your cup tilts midway, you won't have the protection and the promise of a dry Twinkie. So you have to go straight down into the water. I would have them push straight down until they can feel the base of the container or the pot, and then have them sit there. Especially if you're in a clear container, because your kids will see it and it will look like green water is flowing into their Twinkie, and it will be terrifying, right? They want that Twinkie, they're fighting for it. And you are promising them that despite all appearances, that Twinkie is safe if they follow your guidance. So the last step is to pull that cup back up again. Again, they have to do it really specifically. They can't come at an angle. They can't do it in a hurry. They've got to come up, straight up out of that water. You're going to see water on the outside of the cup. And if you look on the inside of the cup, you'll see that your Twinkie is totally dry. This is why I like doing it with colored water, because then you could easily see that the Twinkie had turned green if it was wet, or the paper towel would turn red if the water was red. So you want to do something like that to help your kids see that it actually is, in fact, dry, that there is no water on that Twinkie, even though it's been fully submerged. And then you talk about the story of the Stripling Warriors, and you tell them this is essentially what happened to them. There is no logical reason why 10 to 15-year-olds were able to outstrength the Lamanite army. There is no other way to explain what happened to them than the goodness of God, the deliverance of God, the promises that he made to parents and that he fulfilled in their kids. That's what happens here. Let your kids dive into the Twinkies and the cupcakes. Let them enjoy the dryness that is there, and then talk about, how have you seen this in your life? Where have you seen it in Scripture? And where do you see it in your everyday life, where it seems like all hope is lost and it can't possibly work the way God is saying it? But when you listen to the prophet, his promises are sure. There's connection points there. I promise you can find them. I hope you enjoy it. I can't even count the number of times in the last few years we've heard conference talks about unity, or about setting down contention and avoiding dissensions within our own community. I think we're supposed to support each other and resolve differences and forgive fast, all those things. Because essentially you see the other option play out in the verses this week. Between the kingmen and those who love liberty and freedom, there are these internal strifes. And when there is internal conflict among the Lord's church, it creates these gaping holes where Satan can work his way in. That's what happens with the Nephites too. When Moroni has to take his forces and defend against the kingmen, it opens up vulnerabilities so that the Lamanites can conquer cities. You see it last week and this week. The thing I love is that this week you also see the opposite. You see this band of 2,000 or 2,060 who stay unified despite all the hardships they endure. They somehow manage to stay tight. And I think that's what I wanted to focus on. Not so much what disunity does, but what does unity do and how do I get it? How do we get unity in our families? How do we get unity in our quorums and classes and congregations? How do we find a way to spread the burden so that we all rise together? And I think the Stripling Warriors is a great story about it. So to put this one to the test, you're going to show it with eggs. So you've probably seen this before, but as you approach eggs, we think about walking on an egg. In fact, if I was doing this in a class, I would give your kids one single egg in a Ziploc bag and then ask like the smallest person in your class to just crush it. They can easily crush it with probably one hand. They could crush it with their foot. They could put a book on it. It will crush fast. And then you talk about their vulnerability, that an egg has a really thin shell, and especially if you don't hold it in the strong way, like we learned about last year, if you hold it sideways, it crushes fast. And compare that to the Stripling Warriors. All of them are young. Talk to your kids about what the word stripling even means. It means like between boyhood and manhood, it means young and vulnerable. And then talk about the power that they find when there are many of them together. One of the things I love about this week's story is that you don't have a single name of a single one of these 2,000 young men. They almost act as one. They are so unified that we don't have like a leader. I'm sure there were some, but like you don't hear about that in the verses. Helaman never says, oh, it's thanks to this one young man that I relied on. Like instead it's just, nope, it's my 2,000. It's my 2,060. It's their unity that allows them strength. So that's when your egg walk challenge comes to be. This is where you're going to lay out eggs. Take a dozen eggs, ideally 2 dozen, so you can put 1 foot on each, and you're going to put them out. You want to make sure that they're all flipped the right direction. It doesn't really matter too much. Eggs are pretty strong vertically, so it doesn't really matter which one, but make sure that they're all pointed the same direction so they're about the same height. And then you're going to invite your kids to walk on them. Like, it's not complicated. The only thing you want to do is you want to give them some support. So that first step onto the eggs can be a bit dicey. That's when you'll have the most casualties happen. So you want to give them something to lean their hands on so that they can like step flat-footed. Because essentially what happens on the eggs is the weight of your foot and your whole body is transferred across all those eggs. If you were just stepping on one egg, it would crush in a heartbeat, but you're stepping on all of those eggs and the weight gets distributed. That's why we're encouraged to go seek out unity. Because I think Heavenly Father actually wants our lives to feel easier. He wants us to have a happier, more joy-filled life. And one of the ways he does that is by putting us in families, in quorums, in classes, in congregations, even in communities where the burden can be distributed a little bit. If you want to take it to the next level, you can have your kids like try to crouch down and put weight on the eggs. If you're nervous about little kids not being able to stretch their foot out across, you might have them, like I would put a dad's shoe or a mom's shoe that's flat across the eggs and have them step into it so that their weight gets distributed out. But just want to talk about unity. That's what the printable is all about. So in the printable, you're going to see it looks like this. So it's kind of like the tops of eggs. I read a whole bunch of different conference talks and articles from For the Strength of the Youth about unity. And I tried to pull out some of the core teachings that they offered. And these are what I put on the eggs, so that after you do the unity test and all your kids walk on the eggs, you can actually talk about how the Stripling Warriors achieved it. Unity like this doesn't happen automatically. It's chosen by every member of the group. So things like praying for others, that's a critical component of staying unified in this work of God, or showing charity, or centering your life on Christ, seeking to improve, or confronting calmly when there is a problem. All those things are ways that we can build unity. So I give you this version that looks like eggs that you could just talk through as a teacher, or I'm giving you this version that are little tiny eggs with those same words written on them, so that your kids, you could like lay them out on the floor, let your kids flip one over and pick it up, and then whatever is on their egg, they have to teach. They have to find an example of it in the scriptures from this week's study, or maybe even just an example from their life about where they've seen that unity tip really work, and let them teach each other. The printable will help you, but hopefully the object lesson of stepping on the eggs will make that spiritual understanding a lot deeper. They'll never forget that moment when they were able to step on a whole carton of eggs without any cracks, without any problems. And hopefully that will help them remember the story of the Stripling Warriors even more. One of the ways we actually accomplish unity is by giving each other the benefit of the doubt and forgiving fast and giving people the best assumption we possibly can, right? All those tips. I think you actually see this play out really well in the story of Moroni and Pahoran. Because remember, Moroni is mad. He hears the letter from Helaman about how his sons were at the brink of starvation and that they were successful, but that they're starving and that the people are suffering. And he's mad. He's mad that the government is not taking care of people. And he writes this letter to Pahoran that it sounds mad. Like it is strong. It is strongly worded. And he's basically saying, if you don't fix this, if you don't send the reinforcements that we need, I'm going to take things into my own hands and we'll come against you. Like this is a strong letter from Moroni. What he doesn't know is that there is an insurrection that's happened in the capital, and so Pahoran can't send reinforcements. Pahoran loves the Nephite people just like Moroni does, but he can't. His hands are tied, and he's struggling. And so it's this back and forth letter. And what you have to love is both, right? I love Moroni's heart and why he writes that letter. He just does it in this very harsh tone. But what's beautiful is Pahoran's response to Moroni is soft. Moroni has written these false narratives in his head, right? He's trying to fill in the gaps. It's almost like you can see him wrestling with the puzzle pieces saying like, I don't understand. Is it because you think we aren't righteous anymore? Is it because you think that like we don't deserve help? Is it like, I don't understand why you wouldn't send reinforcements. And he fills in the narrative with all these sinister thoughts. And then Pahoran, in his graciousness and his poise, writes back with a softness. And he says, Moroni, you don't understand. Let me tell you what's happened. I understand the nature of your heart. He gives Moroni this grace where he says, I know this is not what you said, but I know this is what you meant. And that is a critical life skill for adults and teenagers alike, to be able to give people the benefit of the doubt and to say, this isn't like you, there's something else going on. One of my favorite ways to teach that is to create Oobleck, because it has these paired characteristics. So if you've never made it before, it looks like this. It's this weird magic mud that when you touch it firmly, it hardens. You can't punch through it. It's this really hard surface. But when you go in softly, it becomes goopy and maneuverable. There isn't really a recipe for it. It's just 2 parts cornstarch to 1 part water. So for us, I bought one of these generic boxes of cornstarch. I dumped the whole box in and then added, I think, like 1.5 cups of water. It's basically 3 cups of cornstarch to 1.5 cups of water. And if you want, you can add food coloring. Although I would warn you that we learned that the food coloring sort of stains your hands a little bit. So you may want to just make it white. But you're going to let your kids play with Oobleck and point out how it has these different characteristics, right? That you can actually hit it and it resists you. But if you go in softly, you can accomplish things. So this one, you're going to take some household item. For us, we used a AAA battery, but you could use almost anything. And you're just going to drop it on the surface of the Oobleck and let it sink down to the bottom. And then you give your kids a very simple challenge. You give them a challenge to retrieve the battery. That's why I created it in a bowl like this. You want something plastic that they can punch and whack at, but also something clear if you can find it so that your kids can see what's happening. You're going to challenge them to find the battery. And some kids will go in really fast. And they'll learn if they approach it hard and fast, they can't get through. Like they'll try over and over again to get to that battery and they can't get through. If they try to speed things up or if they try to be aggressive, that Oobleck hardens against them. This is Moroni's approach to me. Like his heart is good. He wants to do a good thing. He wants to retrieve that battery, but he's coming at it with this harshness that is different than Pahoran's approach, right? That's the Oobleck to me in its first stage. Then you're going to teach them how to find the battery easier, that they need to go in soft. That if they go in soft, they let their hands kind of sink in. If they go slow and soft and carefully, they can get all the way to the bottom. They can retrieve that battery and then slowly come back up. But it takes a soft touch. This teaches us a lot about how to interact with other people. There is actually more success, more of the time, if you approach with softness, if you approach with a peacemaker heart and you try to assume the very best in what somebody may have said or done, if you try to forgive fast, if you speak about people in the most positive way possible, like President Nelson taught us, to me, that's going in slow. It means I'm not going to come to quick assumptions. I'm not going to write false narratives about their motives. I'm going to come in slow. The blessing that comes when you approach things slow is that you have this influx of the Holy Ghost. That even if your circumstances can't help you understand what's happening or why they did what they did, the Holy Ghost can teach you things that the world can't say. And you can get understandings of, oh, I actually think she's hurt. oh, I think she's really angry. Oh, you could be like Pahoran, who looks at Moroni and says, your words didn't say this, but I can see the beauty of your heart. Oh, I love your heart. What I love about the end of this story is these two men come together. Because Pahoran approached this with such softness, these two men reconcile and they come together, and because of their joint forces, they conquer the Lamanites. This turns the tide of the war because these two men that could have split in this moment reconcile, they come together, and then God can bless them and help their efforts. It's a beautiful story of reconciliation, and you can teach it in the goopiest, slimiest way possible, and your kids will remember it forever. Thanks for joining me, everybody. That's it for week 34 in the book of ALMA. We're done, you guys, with the longest book in the Book of Mormon, so I hope you enjoyed it. Just remember, if you want extra help with these last 11 chapters, this last run, then you can come find me on the live. That happens Monday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. That's on my site, so gather.mecmom.com. It's a community site where you can sign up to be a free member and join the lives and watch the videos, or you can be a subscriber and have access to the notes and the printables from this year and all the years before it. So whichever one works for you is great for me. And then also, if you want access to a certain printable, you can find those on Etsy. So all the Book of Mormon 2024 printables are now available over in my Etsy shop. So just search MecMom on Etsy and it'll pull up for you. Or you can just follow the links that are below in the YouTube video and it'll take you directly to that listing. But I promise, you have lots of tools in your tool belt this week. Just go enjoy it. Get into the scriptures. And I think the Spirit will teach you things that you've never seen before. I think that just because it happened to me. I've studied these scriptures so many times and new things came to the surface that I had never seen before. Answers to prayers that I needed this week as my kids were heading back into school or as I was facing big obstacles they helped me this week, and that'll happen for you as well. So get into your scriptures and enjoy, and I'll see you on Monday.